First, I wanted to see if you would like to say a few words, or do you just want me to ask you a question, Tess?
Just ask me any question you like.
Okay. Well, I know that you're keen to talk to us about being an ally, and how that relates to working, or to your work, or to working with women with disabilities, and maybe you can elaborate further.
Okay, well, I think I've been listening to people today, and they've been saying to work in solidarity with people, and for women with disabilities and for people with disabilities in general, it's about working with rather than for people with disabilities, to be able to provide people with the tools to empower themselves rather than you doing the empowerment for them, for lack of a better word. And I think as well, what makes a good ally is also about we talk about having a gender transformative approach, but also have a disability lens to that. So when we're thinking about access for a woman, we're not only thinking about their gender and the impacts of their gender on the services we're providing, but we're thinking about, she's a wheelchair user, so she needs ramps. She's a wheelchair user, so she might need an accessible toilet. But it's about thinking beyond that, and it's about thinking, okay, how can my approach be more accessible? Does that mean I need to use easy accessible English? Does that mean that I need to make sure that there's braille everywhere? Or does that even mean that in my approach, I'm not afraid to approach her and treat her like an everyday woman? Because we're not that different to everyone else, and people often have this fear of the unknown. And it's okay to ask curious questions, and it's okay to be inquisitive. And I would try and avoid assuming things, because even though I'm a woman with a disability, I don't know everything about having a disability. I'm only the expert in my own experience. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, as Mariana said, women with disabilities can be very strong and empowered and have resilience and strength. But it's this perception of vulnerability that puts us at the margins of society in a way, but we are in fact very strong. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. I'm sure there's still a lot more to talk about how to undertake this work practically, and that's some of the questions that I have. So I've stepped into this at the last minute, so but I do want to acknowledge that other people did want to be here, and that both Bianca and Jen, who aren't feeling too good, are unable to do the facilitation today. But what I suppose I wanted to ask about was some... Actually, step back. I'm going to do what Lish did before with the other panel and say, okay, take a minute and think about, if you've got any questions, we'll just see a show of hands so we know what we've got to prepare for, in terms of timing. So just take a minute now to think about whether or not you've got any questions for the panel. Okay, folks, are there any questions? Can I just see a show of hands if there's any questions out there? I'm sure there must be brewing. How do we go about doing this? What can we do? Any show of hands? Good. Anyone else? Just one? Okay.
Well, I'm trying to just address to everyone that's been there today. Where is most of the funding going to? Which group is getting most of the funding at the moment? Is it something shared right across, or is there a bias toward one particular group?
In terms of which sort of funding?
Any funding that's going from government or wherever else, you've got all these different... You've got this group, you've got the banner overseeing the whole lot, but there must be How is it shared amongst the different groups? Is there one
I
going
don't
more
have the
toward another
particular
group?
answer for that one. I'm not sure that people would have that here. But Lish, did you want to talk? Yeah, we'll park that one and consider some of those ideas about how it might affect our sector. Go.
I'm commenting on that because I've been in situations where I've been defending against something on behalf of women, and then the money's gone into other areas continually, which means what I represented wasn't, and I'd done the work for it, and it kept having a bias toward one other particular group, and it was involved corruption with some of the police and some of the key decision makers. That's been my experience.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Liz?
My question doesn't relate to funding at all, sorry. Star Lady, thank you for your contributions to the space around trans and gender diverse people. I think it's really important for the sector to be grappling with how to be more inclusive. My question was, do you know of many community-based kind of work that's happening in trans and gender diverse communities around prevention, like local stuff?
Transgender, I guess family safety Victoria has given a little bit of funding to Transgender Victoria and Drummond Street to do some sort of prevention campaigns. It's been working with co-design with the trans and gender diverse community. Yeah.
And Robin and Ellen are going to be talking on that tomorrow.
Yeah, great. So that is happening. I think we need a lot more work, and it needs to be not just like trans and gender diverse specific campaigns, but where that work is embedded within all of our work, instead of it just being this isolated, okay, over here, trans and gender diverse community, you can create one specific targeted campaign. It needs to be, much broader. And and broadly I was really excited for some of the conversations before, in particular ones around trans and gender diverse people in prison, because we have all these amazing policies that are coming out of the Department of Health and Human Service, including the Trans Expert Advisory Group on trans and gender diverse people in prison, and where they are allocated, and including their access to healthcare. Great policies, but how are they actually being enacted? And in terms of their enactment, they're not, trans women are always just being sent every single time to men's prison, and people are still being denied to care. And so there's this idea of inclusion, but actually at the end of the day, trans and gender diverse people are actually experiencing oppression within those, within those systems. In particular, I also like some of the conversations before about Aboriginal people and First Nations people incarcerated, because quite often that will be, sister girls and brother boys in the prisons who will most be affected by that. And, broadly in the LGBTI sector, I don't think we've been historically very good at, intersectionality and including people of colour, or sort of collaborating with Aboriginal health services. And I think we've got a long way to go in that.
I've just got a question while the mic goes up to you, and we've got about 5 minutes, so it's a quick question, sort of. It's actually not. But you're just talking about how we undertake this work and have a really good practical way of thinking about and engaging with people across, their diverse experiences. And Star Lady, you talked about co-design to me before, and Mariana, you talked about radical listening. I just wanted to put a question around how do we, what are we not doing with people, because they're not represented in our work very much in PVAW at the moment, to be able to engage them in designing and creating the spaces that make them safer. Question.
I'll answer one. I think we need to be employing, trans and gender diverse people in our organisations. I've seen, there's, if we look at other areas of health, I think, if you look at some Aboriginal and First Nations health. There's many like Aboriginal health organisations where Aboriginal people are the CEOs of those organisations and are employed in those employed. It's not perfect. We've got a long way to go. But at least in the trans and gender diverse space, we're not actually employed. We're not given our own opportunities to be employed. We've got barriers to employment, and we're not seeing the level of sort of like peer workforce or peer engagement. And I think that's one barrier that we need to address, which is similar to things that you were talking about, letting us advocate for ourselves, but employing us and working together.
So yeah, maybe just a little explanation of the radical listening idea.
I'm not going to explain that. Really, I just wanted to say that when I'm part of the Family Association of Victoria's Diverse Communities and Intersectionality Working Group, and I'm thinking about Nicole Lee, who works with WD as well, who said you would never think of going to an Aboriginal controlled health organisation, and not have at least 95%, if not 100%, Indigenous people employed. And for disability, that's just not the case. It's not the case at the Disability Services Commissioner. It's just not. Women with Disabilities Victoria is actually a radical organisation in that sense, and so, yeah, I would say, create opportunity for women with disabilities in leadership and empowerment, increased representation of women with disabilities at all levels. And, in terms of listening to people, I think as I become older, things just sort of fall away in terms of what we need to do. And I think that relationships are so important. It's core to everything that we do, and we say it, but I don't know if we really mean it in some ways. And so that's there are a lot of there are a lot of people that talk about deep listening and radical listening in regards to that. And I think that stepping back, it's a bit like I had conversations with Jen Hargrave from WDV about, I'm not sure I should be the person leading this project. Yeah, and so to be reflective and to be able to say that and just say, I'm not sure if there's, and so today when Bianca wasn't turning up, I even thought, that's even worse. I can't speak. I can't do that, And so, I was texting Jen going, get Tess to come up with me. Not because, because she has important things to say. And it's a bit like having a manel or anything like that. Now men, we need to step back as well, I think.
Thanks, Mariana. Someone from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. It's Anastasia from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. It was really great to hear you guys talk about the barriers to equity for your groups. I guess one thing that was really highlighted to me was just how little data we have, so how little evidence we have. And I know it's boring, and I know that it's, I glaze over when I even say the word data, but we, as a movement, as a sector, we really need to start taking seriously the voices of the people that we're supporting or that we're advocating for, and start to get some real figures so that we can actually compel the argument, can really have that campaign and talk to decision makers with some authority about who this is really impacting and what the cost is to our community, to our families, to our networks, to our foundations. So I don't know, that's my little input. And I know that even probably disabilities is going to get there before the gender diverse groups, and certainly before people seeking asylum and refugee communities as well. So lead the way, guys. Data.
Does anyone want to comment on that?
And then I would just say that it's also important that we form partnerships, because we'll have, I'm certainly not an expert in the language in and around, the prevention space, but also there's lots of LGBTI people or people who come from, some communities, that's not the language that they use to describe their gender identity or sexuality, but we need to be working together because there will be people from those intersectional margins, including LGBTI, refugees and asylum seekers, that we really need to step up and protect, because they have that they're even, that they're even more marginalised than someone of my own experience or our community when those things intersect. And it's really important that we do that work and to take leadership in it. But sometimes with that, like I think we've heard, you've sometimes got to put your head out. There's a little bit of risk in working within that space, but it's important that we collaborate on that so we're not, sometimes fear can hold us back, and it's better when we move past our own uncomfortability and work in those spaces.
That takes us to time for the panel. So I'd just really like to thank Andrew, Mariana, Tess, and for the last minute, and Star Lady for coming along and speaking to us today, and for those of you that have asked questions. So thanks very much, and Claire's going to take us to the next bit.